It's a little bit hard to speak at this point because everybody's enjoying such an amazing Suda and they want to hear music, and there's so much delectable food that they can go literally to the entire backyard. Hopefully the message that I flew to share with you from Miami is one that you'll feel is worth listening to. I'll tell you the truth. It was not easy for me to come. It's not easy for me to leave my shul, to leave the Kehil on Erev Rosh Hashanah. It is not. And Baruch Hashem, from the many opportunities of where I had the ability to go, I had to say no because it's Erev Rosh Hashanah. But when Reb Baruch called and he asked me to fly in special for this, I made the exception. So even though he could be right now anywhere in this very large area, you'll let him know that I did this in his honor and I believe in what he does. To speak in the presence of the Rosh HaYeshiva is something that I don't take lightly. I just want to give Reb Baruch a very quick message. It says in Pirkei Avos, Yehi beischa pasuach lervacha, your home should be open for relief. The Arizal says to read it differently. Yehi beischa pasuach, if your home is open and your heart is open, lirvacha, it will bring you revach and you gesund. Reb Baruch is a person who does things in an exceptional fashion. I want to give him the Arizal's bracha. Yehi beischa pasuach, because he has such an open home and an open heart, lirvacha, it should bring him and his family a gebenchte gesunte Jahr. When my father lived in Eretz Yisrael in Tovshin Yud Aleph Yud Beis and Yud Gimel, some of my chaverim here remember my father, Hagoyin HaTzadik Rabbi Shapiro. He lived in Eretz Yisrael 51 to 53. Ki Yadua, he was known as Mordechai Lakewater. He was the Ben Bayis by Rabbi Zalman. Because our cousin is Reb Shloimeh Berman, Adam von Steipler, he was very close to the Chazon Ish. Had a tremendous shaykhus with the Gesher HaChaim, Rabbi Chil Michal, with the Brisker Rav, and he went for a daily walk with Reb Zion Yadler. Reb Zion Yadler was the Maggid von Altstadt of Yerushalayim. He was a Sagi Nor, he couldn't see. I have the diary of what my father spoke about with Reb Zion Yadler when they went for a walk every day. Let me tell you a maisa why I flew in tonight. When Ben Zion Yadler was 6 years old, he was a choyle mesukon, he was gravely ill, he was on his hospital bed. And he said to the staff, take me to Har HaZeisim, I want to go to the kaver, the grave of my moyel, the Imre Bina Reb Meir Auerbach. What does a 6-year-old want by the grave of his moyel? They take him on a little stretcher, maybe this big, and they go through the narrow graves of Har HaZeisim, and they finally find Reb Meir Auerbach, the Imre Bina's grave, and at that point, 6-year-old Ben Zion Yadler gets off his stretcher, and this is what he says. Reb Meir, Chazal say maschil b'mitzvah oimrim gemor. It's not oimrim loy gemor, that's wrong, it's oimrim gemor. 6 years ago when you were my moyel, you brought me into this world. I'm not ready to leave. You were my maschil b'mitzvah. Ask the Ribono Shel Olam oimrim gemor. I want to finish. And he lived many, many decades till approximately the age of 90. I flew in to tell some of the finest Balabatim in Klal Yisrael, the people in Eretz Yisrael are the maschil b'mitzvah. They're living there and they're learning there. You heard figures from Baruch to raise 1.6 and it should go global. I want you to take to heart Oimrim Gemor. I was grateful when Baruch told the Yid who was ready to write out a check, wait till after the drasha. And I hope he doesn't make it smaller. The Aniyim in Eretz Yisrael, the Yungalayt, are the maschil b'mitzvah, Oimrim Gemor. We have to finish it and make them have a successful yontif. At the end of World War I, the Cossacks turned on the Poles. There was a Polish soldier who was running for his life. He makes it to a small shtetl, and he bangs on the door of a Yid. The Yid opens the door, and the man says, "Save a Polish soldier, they're after me." He tells him to put on a tallis and stand in the corner. Maisa shehoya kach hoya. He tells him to put on a tallis. 5 minutes later, the Cossacks knock. You saw a Polish soldier. He sees just somebody davening in tallis, and he walks away. The Polish soldier said, "You saved the Polish soldier, and one day I'll repay you." Now I'm looking at some faces. I imagine the recognition I see is some of you know the story. This Polish soldier went on to become the most powerful man in Poland, the Polish premier, Joseph Pilsudski. He wanted to reward that Yid who saved him, so he sent a message that he should come. The Yid was afraid, but finally he goes through all the government buildings, and the Polish premier, Pilsudski, says, "You remember me?" He says, "No." He says, "You saved me years ago. You thought you were saving a Polish soldier? You saved me, which essentially means you saved all of Poland. And here's the reward." He gave him free trade in the wine industry, and then a white ticket about this size. And he said, "Whenever you need me, you can cash in once, bring this to me." Years come and go. 8 yeshiva bochrim were taken, and they were going to be sent to Siberia. They asked the Godel Hadar, Reb Chaim Oizer, "What should we do?" Reb Chaim Oizer said, "Go to the Yid who has a ticket to take it to Pilsudski." They go to the Yid. They said, Reb Chaim Oizer said, "Cash in on the ticket now." He goes like he did years earlier from building to building, and now he's in front of Pilsudski, and the tables turn, and he says to Pilsudski, "You remember me?" He says, "No." He pulls out the ticket, and he says, "You told me I had one chance, and this is it. I want you to save the 8 yeshiva bochrim." Sure enough, Pilsudski remembers, and he saves the 8. And they all were able to successfully escape and live. Now, if I stop the story right there, it's a fabulous story, but surely some of you know the rest of the story. You didn't need me to fly in and tell you. One of the 8 that were saved with the ticket that was given to Pilsudski grew up to be none other than Moron the Stipler. Now, what would a world look like today if it weren't for a Stipler? You know why? Because when that Yid answered a knock on the door, he didn't save a Polish soldier. He didn't save all of Poland. Essentially, he saved world Jewry because he answered a knock on the door. When Reb Baruch told me why he wants me to fly in on Erev Yontif, I said to my family, if this guy answered the knock on the door, then how could I not come? Sometimes you only get one chance to answer the knock on the door. If that Yid would not have saved that Polish soldier, I ask you to think for a minute, where would world Jewry be today? One of the 8 was the Stipler. Tonight is a chance to answer a knock on the door. There are real things going on in Eretz Yisrael. You heard all of the stories. A little while ago, when I went with Baruch and a number of others here, I had the privilege to lead a trip to Prague and other places. You know that today was the 250th yard site of Rabbi Yonason Eibschitz? Today. I was standing in his shul 2 months ago, and I said this vart. People walk around and say, you have to have achrayus. What does achrayus mean? You know how you spell achrayus? Aleph, Ches, Reish, Yud, Vav, Saf. You know what that stands for? Every letter you need to know about how to care for a fellow Yid. Aleph, you got to take care of yourself. Aleph Ches, you got to take care of your brothers and family. Aleph Ches Reish, Acher, you got to take care of others. You don't live in a bubble. Aleph Ches Reish Yud, you tell a fellow Yid, Acharai, follow after me, I'm the real deal. Aleph Ches Reish Yud Vav, he'll want to follow after you because he sees you're sincere. And what's the last letter? Aleph Ches Reish Yud Vav Saf. Aleph to Tuf, beginning to end. That's the true definition of achrayus. It's not when it's good for me and when it's comfortable. Achrayus is to take care of yourself, to take care of your family, to take care of others, beginning to end. Somehow our Gedolim always get it right. This past Pesach, when I spoke, where Baruch and many others were in the Doral in Miami, I said over this vort, and a Yid came over to me, Pasaic, and he says, I'm a doctor. My mother had heart trouble for years. Every Erev Pesach, she would call Reb Moshe and ask, can I take this medicine? Does it have chometz? Now, you know what an Erev Pesach is like? What would Erev Pesach be like for Reb Moshe? And every year he took time to tell the lady, it's fine, it's not chometz. He did this for over 20 years. One year, Erev Pesach, the doctor told me my mother was getting elderly and she forgot to call Reb Moshe. An hour before candle lighting on Erev Pesach, her phone rings. She picks up and the voice on the other end says, A guten Erev Yom Tov. This is Moshe Feinstein calling. I didn't hear from you. Are you okay? I hear from you every year. When I didn't hear from you today, I was concerned. Maybe you're not well. That's achrayus. That's what it means to realize you have to reach out to someone. When the Second World War ended, there was a Yid in Borough Park who lost everything. He used to walk the streets aimlessly. And there was a man who stopped him every day and gave him chizuk. And the man said, I only was able to go on living because of the man who stopped to speak to me every day. And so who was that man? Who was the man who had all the time in the world to speak to a broken Yid in Borough Park? It was the Rosh Hashiva Rabbi. Rabbi Kotler did not live in Lakewood. The yeshiva was here. He came on Shabbos. Weekdays he was in Borough Park. And every day he would stop to build the Yid. That's achrayus. One day Rabbi says these words to the Yid, you'll remarry, you'll have a daughter, and Be'ezus Hashem, I'll dance at her chasana. The man said, I wasn't even thinking along those lines. Sure enough, he remarries, and he has a daughter, and she becomes the apple of his eye. When she's about 10, the Rosh Hashiva Rabbi is nifter. And the man is devastated. About 10 years later, the girl is a kala. She's at her chasana. In the middle of the first dance, the Rosh Hashiva Reb Schneier walks in, and he dances with the kala's father. When the first dance ends, the kala's father says, I'm happy you're here. They weren't particularly close. What brings you here? And this is what Reb Schneier said. 10 years ago, before my father Rabban was nifter, he called me in and said, there's a Yid in Borough Park that has a daughter that I told him I would dance at her chasana. Obviously, that's not going to happen. Take down his name and find out when she becomes a kala. And go in and dance at that chasana in my place. Maisa shahaya kachaya. If you would ask somebody, so what did Rabbi have on his mind before he was nifter? The list would be a gazillion things long. You know what he wanted? There's a Yid, I said I would dance at the daughter's wedding. Dance in my place. That's achrayus. About 20 years ago, somebody showed me the following vart. If you know whose vart it is, you could tell me. I think it's life-changing. Yaakov tells Yosef to look for Shalom Achecha and Shalom Hatzayin. How are your brother and how are their sheep? Why did you say the word Shalom twice? Just say Shalom Achecha Vitzayin. Why do you double up Shalom Achecha and again Shalom Hatzayin? Yaakov Avinu was telling Yosef a lesson for us today, entering 5775. You know why there's a special word Shalom for Achecha and another word for Tzayin? Because what it means for sheep to have peace You know what it means for sheep to have peace? I have grass to eat and graze on, and you don't. So what? I'm fine. That's Shalom Hatzoin. Zokt Yankiv Avinu, that's unacceptable for Shalom Achecha. If a sheep has and another doesn't, that's okay. But if one Yid has and another doesn't, then the first one doesn't have. What's acceptable for sheep is unacceptable for Klal Yisrael. Let me ask you, if there's a Yid who can't make Yontif, and the wife doesn't have shoes to take the sick children to the doctor, and the kids are picking lunch out of a garbage, are you enjoying Yontif? What's acceptable for Shalom Hatzoin is not acceptable for Shalom Achecha. Shalom Achecha means if someone doesn't have shoes or food or is eating by taking someone else's lunch, then I don't have. The fact that so many people came on an Erev Rosh Hashanah to raise a large sum of money means one thing. You understand Shalom Achecha better than anyone. The Horaya, you're here. You knew why you were coming. I understand Baruch made many phone calls. You knew that you were coming to raise it to an unprecedented level. I want the world to hear tonight. The group I'm speaking to understands Shalom Achecha better than most. Because if there are thousands of families who don't have food, then can I be at peace? There's a well-known Maisa that in the Kiruv organization, Lev La'achem, there was somebody who worked for them. They had a 3-year-old Yingala. One day he went to Cheder. I'm sorry, it's a sad story. He went to Cheder and he wasn't well. Throughout the day, he's not feeling well. He lies down and the 3-year-old Yingala is nifter. They're sitting shiva. In middle, there's a phone call. The man takes it and he comes back and they said, who was it? He said, I'm in middle of being Makar of 8 boys who don't keep Shabbat. And one called and said, Rabbi, we heard what happened to your 3-year-old. This Shabbat, the 8 of us will keep in your 3-year-old's memory. One of the people, sometimes at a Shiva home, people don't say things that they should. It's hard to believe. One of the people turns to him and says, that's a really nice story, but what does it mean? The 8 of them, they'll keep this one Shabbat, and will they ever keep Shabbat again? Is it going to have any continuity or hamshocha? Is it such a big deal? Open your hearts to what he answered. He turns to the man who wanted to know if it was a big deal that they'll keep Shabbat, and he said these words. You want to know if it's a big deal? Let me tell you. You know what my wife and I would do to get our child back for one more Shabbos? You know what my wife and I would give up? That he should hold my hand one more Friday night and bounce on my knee, Yom Zeh Mechubad? My wife and I would give up everything to have the 3-year-old back for one Shabbos. And now the Ribbono Shel Olam is getting back 8 children for one Shabbos. And you want to know if it's a big deal? Ask my wife. It's a big deal. If we leave here tonight, and there are thousands of families who before tonight couldn't make Yontif, ate out of the garbage, and didn't have shoes, and because of your Shalom Achecha, the world will find out about it. If because of your Shalom Achecha, those children can learn and produce and vaksois, ask the man from Lev La'achem. It's a big deal. With your reshus, I'm just going to end with a vort and a final maisa. Hashmi'ini es koilech, ki koilech orev. What does the word orev mean? I have a sweet voice. You just heard the choir before. They have a sweet voice. Heiliger Radomsker says, I tell you, you'll hear this pshat once, you'll never forget it. Orev is from the word arevus kol Yisrael, arevim zeh bazeh. Hashmi'ini es koilech. Do you want your tefillos answered? Ki koilech orev. It has to be a voice of arevus, I care, achrayus, Reb Moshe, Reb Aaron. Dr. Radomsker. Who taught us this ability to get along better? Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov Avinu. He had 12 sons, and at the end of the Sin and Kina, there was Yachad Shiftei Yisrael. Listen to what the Radomsker says. What tefillah did Avram establish? Shachris. What tefillah did Yitzchak establish? Mincha. And what's the name of the tefillah that Yaakov established? Not Ma'ariv. Arvis. You gotta care about somebody else. I often ask people, I saw there was a minyan before that daven Ma'ariv. It's not enough to go to sleep and ask yourself, did I daven Ma'ariv? Did I daven Arvis? The Rebbeinu Shleilim says, Hashmi'ini es koilech ki koilech orev. I'll answer your tefillos when it's a voice of arevos, when there are thousands of families in Eretz Yisrael who will look at tonight's gathering and say, I had a Yom Tif because of you. If that's Arvus, then the Rebbeinu Shleilim says, Hashmi'ini es koilech. And by the way, lest you think that only the Gedolim know Achrayus. There was a 10-year-old boy who told a tutor in Eretz Yisrael, I need help with some subject. She starts to tutor the 10-year-old and she says, you're like a brilliant boy, you don't need help. He says, yeah, I do, I need help. She continues to tutor him. Finally she says, what's the story here? You're like brilliant, you didn't need me as a tutor, you're wasting money. He says sheepishly, you want to know why I needed a tutor? There's a boy in my class who's the only one who's called out by a tutor. And he feels so inferior that he's the only kid called out. I created an excuse that I need you as a tutor, so now he sees more people need a tutor. He feels like he belongs. That's achrayus. And that's ki koilech orev. I imagine some of you heard that story about the 10-year-old boy. You know why you heard the story. Because 2 months ago, the world found out who that boy was. His name was Gilad She'ar. He was one of the 3 Bochrim that were kidnapped and murdered, and the world davened for 18 days. Gilad She'ar, at the age of 10, understood achrayus and understood ki koilech orev. Gilad She'ar, Hashem Yimkom Damo, got a tutor, so someone doesn't feel left out. And I'll end with this thought. In 1951, in the Yeshiva Welt, many say, certainly here in Lakewood, that this is the most colossal and famous story. In 1951, Yud Aleph, my father was walking in Tel Aviv, a wide boulevard, probably even wider than this backyard, Rehov Allenby. He looks over there, maybe where the lights are, and he sees a green wooden kiosk. And he goes over to the green wooden kiosk and he wants to know, he sees the Yid is not a Poshet Yid, it's an Alta Yid, who's learning Mishnayos Meiser Sheni, and he never stops learning. Like this. He learns, he doesn't stop, he asks the person what he wants, he takes the item, gives him the change, gives him a bag, and he never stops learning. Who is this Yid? Finally, my father walks over and he sees a young person go over to this Yid in the green wooden kiosk, Rehov Allenby, Tel Aviv, 1951, and he says to him, the young fellow says, I want cigarettes. This is Erev Shabbos. He says, Masha Achshav. He says, 12:15. He says, Slicha. Imkein, ani lo mocher sigariot achrei chatzot berev Shabbat. I'm not going to sell them after Chatzos Erev Shabbos because he didn't want there to be Chilul Shabbos. My father's wondering, who are you? He goes over to this man and he says, what's your name? The man says Yankel Oxenkrug. Now there are a lot of people who say over the story, Baruch Hashem, as the Ben Zakunim in my family, I have sisters, as the only son, my father was makbid that it be said, Emes Lamite, with every pitchifka and cuticle, and it's not always written or said correctly. This is how it happened. What's your name? Yankel Oxenkrug. He says to my father, what's your name? He says, Mordechai Shapiro. Where do you live? America. Where do you learn? Lakewood. Who's your Rosh Hashiva? Rabbi Aaron Kotler. To which the man then says, Nu, was is geworn von em? What became of Rabbi Aaron? He says, what became of Rabbi Aaron? Rabbi Aaron is the prince of the Torah world. He's the Sarah Torah. The world was changed because of Rabbi Aaron. When my father said it, the man started to cry. My father said to Yankel Oxenkrug, what are you crying for? And this is what he said. Decades ago, I was a butcher in Minsk. I couldn't learn as much as I wanted to. So I put aside a kopika for every kilo of meat that I sold. I had in jars thousands of kopikas. I sold thousands of kilo of meat after a couple of years. I put it on a wagon, and I went to the local cheder with jars and buckets of kopikas. And I said, send 2 boys that have Iluya heads to learn in Slabotke. One of the 2 boys, one of the 2 that went with my kopikas, we used to call Arkila Svislitzer. Arkila is the nickname of Reb Aaron from the city of his youth, Svislitz. He was one of the 2 who went with my kopikas. So my father stared. This man was responsible in part for Reb Aaron? Decades later, the Pikeach Hador Reb Yankiv Kamenetsky used to spend part of the winter by us in Miami Beach. Many Wednesday evenings he would eat dinner in the home of my parents on Prairie Avenue. One Wednesday evening by dinner, my father was telling Reb Yankiv Kamenetsky the Maisa with Yankel Oxenkrug, and one of the 2 that went with the kopikos to Slabotka was Reb Aaron, to which Reb Yankiv says, yeah, Reb Mordechai, that's the way the Maisa goes. And I know, because I was the second boy who went with those kopikos. A man's kopikas were responsible for Reb Aaron and Reb Yankiv. Yehi Rotzain, it should be the will of the Rebbeinu Shalom. You came tonight and you already answered the knock on the door. The ones in Eretz Yisrael are the maschil b'mitzvah. Let them see tonight oimrim gemor. They could eat, have a full fridge, shoes to wear. Children can go and get healthy and have a v'samachtu b'chagecha because of you. Any vort that I said tonight, I was telling myself, because now that I'm looking at this oilam, I realize you get achrayus. You understand shalom achecha. You're bringing the Rebbeinu Shalom's children closer to him, and like we said from Leiv La'achim, that worker, it's a big deal. It should be the will of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Just as Yankel Oxenkrug was able to change the world with a Reb Aaron and a Reb Yankiv, tonight, the checks you write out, and the other communities that will do the same, will build the future families and Gedolim, and in the merit of your Ki Koilech Orev, may we see Hashmi'ini es Koilech. Tefillah is answered for a gebenchte, gesunde Yor with Yiddish Nachas.